Welcome to the Man Cave Podcast with Dan Casper.
He is Dr. Austin Crow, Chippewa Valley Orthopedics and Sports Medicine, joining us here this morning. First up, you guys ready for a big game tomorrow going up against Stanley Boyd there, Doctor?
It is. Homecoming. Big
game. Big
game.
one. Should be a good one. Should be a classic, I would think, too. So, well, best of luck to your crew over there, too. So, coming off of a nice win last week as well. So
yeah, that was a well-fought game. Yeah, it was back and forth. I mean, tied up into the third quarter, and then we were able to make a couple big plays that turned the tide. And we had a lot of leadership from our big players on that game. So it was great. Yeah.
Absolutely. I want to start off this morning, Austin, talking about a guy we've talked about a couple times here in the last couple weeks, Christian McCaffrey. Another update on him. Apparently, he has tendonitis in both, or Achilles tendonitis in both of his Achilles, and his dad actually came out and kind of blamed his son because of his off-season training. He said, quote, "If I would say that Christian has a weakness, is that he sometimes has to protect himself from himself in terms of training too much and doing too much." Do you think that could be a reason of why he has tendonitis in both of these Achilles, is that he's working out too much or too hard?
Well, certainly, I mean, these do fall in the category of kind of overuse. I mean, there's a portion of it that's probably attributable to that. I think I would say bilateral Achilles tendonitis is a pretty rare diagnosis. I mean, we see a good amount of Achilles tendonitis roll through the clinic, but bilateral, I mean, not to say I've never seen it, just pretty rare. So certainly there's something at play, and if you look at something that's bilateral or systemic, you look at a bigger cause usually, as opposed to kind of more of a fluke incident. So certainly, I mean, to keep in shape like he does, I'm sure he pushes his body pretty hard, and maybe there are some things he's doing in training that are exacerbating this. So I'm sure his medical staff and training team are going to look at his off-season workouts in the future for ways they can try to prevent this, or maybe incorporate some more stretching or other things that could help mitigate it. But yeah, I mean, I think there's probably something to that.
Switching over to the game that I don't really want to talk about with you, but we have to because a couple injuries happened last week.
What game?
I can't remember it. I don't remember what the result was. Devontae Wyatt, Packers defensive lineman, kind of coy with his injury. The reporter said that they had seen him leave in a walking boot and crutches. Yet Matt LaFleur just the other day said more testing until we figure out what the plan is going to be. When you hear a coach after a few days, especially at this level, like you've mentioned, they're probably getting tested every single day. Is that pretty much like they're just getting second and third opinions at this point?
Yeah, I mean, at that point, they've already been assessed. They've already had probably an MRI, minimum x-rays. And so at that point, you're looking at a couple different things. One is going to be additional opinions, which NFL athletes get very commonly. The other thing, too, is some of these, I'd say, kind of more low and moderate grade injuries do evolve. In other words, someone sprains their ankle, sometimes on day one they're limp and can't put weight, and it's like, look, all hope is lost. And then 2-3 days later, all of a sudden they're progressing, and you kind of see how the swelling and pain respond. And so there's a little bit of both. So it's probably additional opinions. It's also some evolution of the injury and how they're progressing. So it's probably multiple things. But, yeah, I mean, they've been pretty tight-lipped on that one. Whenever you go in a boot, certainly you at least raise your eyebrows and be like, all right, that's a pretty significant ding. But, it doesn't sound like they jump right to this is surgical or this is going to put them on the IR. So the hope is it won't be an injury that lingers for a while. But, again, it's unclear exactly how severe it is.
And then Christian McCaffrey in that same game, I mean, he bent like a pretzel on that one play. And, one report from the NFL Network said it was a high ankle sprain and injured reserve was probably going to happen. Yet Matt LaFleur said kind of dodged a bullet, and it doesn't sound like he's going to be on injured reserve. Is it possible that, depending on the grade for a high ankle sprain, he potentially could be back in a couple weeks?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. So, I mean, that certainly is a super classic mechanism for a high ankle sprain. So when I saw it happen, that's first thing I thought was like, oh, that's a high ankle. Good news is it didn't break at the same time. I mean, because unfortunately we do see that where the ankle goes through that same motion. And, as there's, increasing energy applied to that ankle, you go from a low-grade high ankle to a high-grade high ankle, and then eventually bones start breaking. So we do see that. So thank goodness that didn't happen to him. But when you look at it, the amount of damage to the ligaments are assessed on two things. One is the clinical exam, and two is on the MRI. And so they have a much clearer understanding of the severity of the injury. And so, yeah, there are high ankles that can bounce back a little quicker, but I will say a legit high ankle, which that certainly looked like it, it's tough to get back before 4 to 6 weeks. But on the flip side, if he's not having as much pain and swelling as they first anticipated, and he's progressing more quickly, I mean, there's no reason you can't. I mean, it's going to be, if it is a kind of a grade 1, maybe grade 2, they are allowed to play as they can tolerate. So if he can tolerate it and he can go, then he might be able to go.
I got to imagine, too, him being a speed guy and a wide receiver that's supposed to be a downfield threat, that would have to factor into whenever he could come back, I would imagine.
Oh, for sure. I mean, they're going to be, with this, it'll be, I mean, at minimum, I'm guessing it's still going to be a couple weeks. I just don't see a way with that severity of injury that he's going to come back quicker than that. But what they'll do is they'll start doing the old game time thing where it's like, all right, we're going to get him out, we're going to have him run, we're going to have him cut, do some drills. How's he feel? How's he look? Okay, he's go, no go, and so there's going to be that. Or the other option, of course, is to go to IR and put him on the list, and then he's out for a set number of weeks. So, but it seems like that's not the route they're going to take, which makes me think it will be more of a week-to-week assessment and evaluation. But you are absolutely correct. I mean, different positions on the football field are very different, and the demands they put in their body. And clearly, he is a guy that is fast, and he has to be able to cut and pivot hard. So that's going to probably affect his game for a little bit longer. Maybe some other positions would.
Staying with wide receivers, one that's kind of out there and a little confusing is Rashee Rice from the Chiefs. It was a gruesome knee injury, or a lot of people, a lot of people are speculating, and still he's on IR, but they haven't really said what it is. Andy Reid said he's going to get more testing when the swelling goes down next week. I just saw Albert Breer a couple minutes ago tweet this, saying one thing we didn't get to on Thursday Night Football postgame was that Rice is expected to have his knee scoped next week after the swelling goes down. There's fear of ACL damage, but also PCL damage. Is it possible that the swelling is just so much that an MRI can't pick up what the actual problem is?
The MRI will assess it. The thing about ACLs and even more so PCLs is sometimes you'll have these partial injuries, and it's hard to say how much that really affects the integrity. And when the leg is really swollen, it's hard to get as good of a physical exam. And so a lot of it's going to be done on physical exam for that, is the actual laxity that we feel. So there's multiple different tests that we do for ACL and PCL. So what's called a Lockman test, an anterior drawer pivot shift for the PCL, a reverse pivot shift, posterior drawer. Those are all tests that we do to assess the stability of the knee. I mean, and obviously with the irony is that interceptions thrown in your own quarterback is the one who takes out your knee. So that's the bummer for Rice. I mean, and then, everyone saw that shot of his knee clearly hyperextending. And so that is a very classic mechanism for ACL. Now, with that same impact, the further down the leg, it also applies a posterior force to the tibia. Not only do you hyperextend, but you can translate the tibia posteriorly, which is how you injure the PCL. So looking at that, my thought was ACL or PCL, or in this case, potentially both. And so I think what they're going to look at is they're going to scope the knee, they're going to look to see what amount of damage, and then they're really going to do a good exam while he's asleep. So it's called an exam under anesthesia, and they're really going to crank on it and say, all right. And there's a huge difference between scoping a knee and kind of doing a cleanup versus having to do an ACL versus an ACL and a PCL. So those are very, very different surgeries, recoveries, long-term prognosis. So I'm sure that he's kind of waiting with bated breath to see exactly what happens. But looking how, it was a direct blow to that knee, and it definitely bent back significantly. I'd have to imagine one of those ligaments was injured enough where reconstruction is going to be likely. And certainly him going to the IR and going to surgery suggests that as well.
Oh, man, that stinks. Speaking of knee injuries, just kind of from watching the game, how did you think that Jordan Love looked with the knee? It looked like he was maybe favoring it a little bit, not quite sure how much weight he could put on his throws, but overall it sounds like he came through it. Actually was a full participant in practice for the first time since week 1 yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, so watching the game, I think there's no question he favored. I mean, they showed several clips of it. You could see him kind of after a throw, his follow-through, come a little ginger. That being said, a couple times during live plays, he moved within the pocket reasonably well. So, I mean, I'm sure it's still there, and I'm sure he still feels it, but clearly it's enough where he's able to move around okay. So do I think it's still affecting him? Absolutely. Do I think it's also probably a little bit mental? Absolutely. as he kind of goes through each week, as he gets a little more normalized, it should get better and better. And that's the beauty of MCLs, is that they tend to do well in the long term. So I would, I'd say, the Packer Nation should be thinking another couple weeks till this is hopefully kind of behind him altogether. But I wouldn't be surprised if he still has a little bit of a kind of giddy up in his step and maybe loses just a little bit of explosive speed due to some discomfort. Or sometimes, again, they don't trust that leg. So when they go to plant on it, it's just like, it just doesn't feel great yet. So there's that aspect too. But it should heal really well. And again, long-term prognosis is excellent with isolated MCL. And
before I let you go, I got to ask, his practice window is open. How remarkable would this be if Nick Chubb gets back on the field and playing? Yeah, that guy's been through a lot, to say the least. And so what we just talked about, Rice with a multi-ligament injury, Nick Chubb's was, and that is a big, big surgery. It's not his first major reconstruction. So for him to get back and do that, it just speaks to what kind of athlete and what kind of dedication he has to his sport and his craft. So, it is amazing as an orthopedic surgeon and football fan to see that is what people are able to put their bodies through. And we're all human beings, but some of us are made just a little bit different. And so when those guys can come back from things like that, you just have to say, wow. It'd be impressive. I just, knowing what goes into those injuries and what the knee goes through, I have to imagine he's not going to be the same player he was, but I would love to be proven wrong. He's Dr. Austin Crowe, Chippewa Valley Orthopedics and Sports Medicine, inside the training room. As always, well, congrats on the win. We'll get you back on December 29th. Just saying.
There's still a lot of season left.
But hey, best of luck tomorrow. Big game for you guys, for Regis and Stanley Boyd. Enjoy the weekend, buddy, and we'll catch up with you again soon. Okay.
Absolutely. Have a great one.